Chapter 31 Pendant and Ambush. This is already the 6th enchantment shop, Liliana thought. Due to the development of the Elementium silver industry, Thorn City could be said to be the most prosperous city in the entire Vic continent other than the Empire's capital, Platinum City, and Alpha Capital's Ring City. However, even though she visited 6 famous enchantment shops in a row, she still couldn't figure out the origins of the ancient Sunbird pendant. Even the owner of the old enchantment shop that claimed to have a 200-year history ransacked the basement for half a day before finding some fragmented clues from a moldy ancient book. Phoenix, the Twilight Kingdom, which is also the immortal bird of the current ancient faith in Quicksand Province, symbolizes the sun and the sky. The shopkeeper pointed at the awkward ancient text on the book and said to her, "I can only confirm that the appearance of this pendant should be the faith totem of the ancient Twilight Kingdom. As for the runes and enchantments engraved on it, I don't understand them at all. However, I can confirm that the enchantment circuit on it doesn't work using the same principles as the current enchantment system. It's even incompatible with the charging interface." The shop owner hesitated for a moment before lowering his voice and asking her, "Where did you get this pendant? I even suspect that it relies on a human soul to recharge." There were usually only 3 ways for magic chanters to obtain magic power in the present world: the astral world, the moon realm, and the soul itself. After the astral laws were established, the astral world became the only legal way for magic chanters to obtain magic power. Any mage who used the moon realm and the soul as a channel for magic power was considered a heretic. If the shop owner hadn't seen the 2 people entering the shop wearing Alpha University's uniforms, he would have informed the church to arrest the heretics immediately. Having failed to gain anything from the 6th enchantment shop, Liliana decided to try her luck at another enchantment shop. However, her senior, Rod Wilson, gave her another suggestion. "Liliana, since the shop owner said that this pendant might need a human soul to replenish its magic power, should we go to some less formal places and ask? Perhaps the people there know more." After Liliana was released from her confinement at home, she found her friend from Alpha University's enchantment department and hoped that he could help appraise the pendant given to her by the person who called himself William Kane. However, after fiddling for a while, other than using up all the magic power stored in the pendant, he didn't obtain any useful information. He didn't even know how to recharge it. Fortunately, Rod Wilson's family was in the Elementium silver refinery industry, so he was very familiar with the layout of Thorn City's enchantment shops. Therefore, he offered to bring Liliana to a few enchantment shops that could provide high-quality appraisal services. After 6 consecutive failures, he came up with a new suggestion: the black market. Liliana frowned when she heard her senior's words. If it were a few weeks ago, she would definitely be looking forward to that place. However, after experiencing the series of events from before, she didn't have a good impression of the black market. However, if she wanted to figure out the true identity of the magic chanter who called himself William Kane alone, it seemed that this was the only clue she could investigate. Fine. Their footsteps echoed in a damp tunnel. Occasionally, the sound of bats flapping their wings and rats scampering could be heard from the corner. Rod held a lit magical medium and led the way, with Liliana following closely behind. According to Rod, this black market was established deep in the tunnels of Thorn City. That used to be the gathering place of the Thieves Guild, but after Duke Simon took office, in order to combat the smuggling of Elementium silver, he eliminated all the factions of the Thieves Guild from the Blackwater province. Then, Thorn City's Elementium silver smuggling channels are almost monopolized by the Duke himself. Rod spoke as he walked. The tunnel was deep and winding, but it was eerily quiet. Perhaps because she was a little afraid, Liliana, who originally wasn't interested in such topics, raised her voice and asked, "Since the entire Thorn City's Elementium silver industry belongs to the Duke, why smuggle it yourself?" "This is because the smuggled Elementium silver doesn't need to pay the Empire's trade taxes." Rod turned around and smiled at her. Perhaps it was because the tunnel was dim, but his genial smile, which looked no different from before, made Liliana's heart tingle. The Elementium silver on the black market has a very high premium. As for the mining thieves, they bribed the law enforcers of Thorn City for the duration of the mining. The Duke also takes another cut during their exports. Overall, smuggling earns about the same through official channels. Furthermore, all of this is under the Duke's control. There's no need to heed the royal family. Liliana nodded as if she understood. After walking in the maze-like tunnels for a few minutes, Liliana thought of something and asked, Rod, I remember that your family is also in the Elementium silver refinement business, right? Then, will this smuggling affect your family? Be it smuggling or formal channels, it's actually to ensure the Duke's interests. Do you know which mine provides the Wilson family with raw ores? Which one? Silverstream mine. I'm not too sure. Is there anything special about this mine? It doesn't matter, he just needs to be the only person to know. As Rod spoke, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Liliana almost bumped into his back. At this moment, they arrived at a slightly wider fork in the tunnel. Rod, what do you mean? Liliana hurriedly asked. In panic when the other party suddenly stopped, Rod turned his head 180 degrees and said to her face to face, the person who has been following us since the beginning. No, should I say two people? As he spoke, he still had a warm smile on his face. Liliana finally understood why she felt her hair stand on end when she saw his expression. Rod, or rather, the thing that looked like Rod, had a frozen smile on its face as if something was talking while donning Rod's skin. Liliana wasn't sure if she screamed. She only knew that when she woke up, she was already sitting on the dirty ground. Between her and Rod was a tall man wearing a black cloak and holding a door-like sword. This person had apparently saved her. Were you hinting that the monsters below the Silverstream mine are related to the Duke? The man asked, trying to conceal the rage in him. As for Rod, he only laughed and said, Hello, Castorant, and that little pet of yours. It was our dereliction of duty to let you escape previously, but we won't give you a chance this time. Cass warily glanced around. 7 or 8 skeletons in half armor and wrapped in mist walked out of a few forks in the tunnel. The weapons in their hands constantly changed color as the mist swirled. I promise that you will be reunited with your friends. Chapter 32 Fairy Fog. Castorant. Liliana had heard of this name a few days ago when she returned to Thorn City. For some reason, the former chief of the Bramble mercenaries had become a lunatic who killed innocent citizens indiscriminately. In just 2 months, he had killed 28 people and was currently wanted in the entire Blackwater province. Liliana looked past the black swordsman and at Rod, whose head had turned 180 degrees. Was this the truth? Was the black swordsman hunting monsters disguised as humans? Can you stand? Cass asked anxiously as he glanced at Liliana, who was sitting on the ground from the corner of his eye. The monster in front of him was on a completely different level from the opponents he had killed previously. Coupled with the 7 or 8 skeletons wearing half armor and shrouded in mist, he couldn't divert his attention at all. Liliana stood up using the wall for support. Only then did she realize that her shoulder had been sliced open, and blood was flowing non-stop. No problem, Liliana held her wound and said through gritted teeth. Then, she chanted a healing spell, and a green light emitted from her palm healed the wound slowly. What a pity, the monster turned its stiff neck when it saw this. If only you had hesitated for a moment. In that case, my lovely junior's neck would have been snapped like a pole. What a pity. I still want to take that Coast Dynasty pendant back and study it. You knew I was following you? Cass asked. Ever since that pet of yours followed me all the way yesterday, I knew that you would come looking for me in the next 2 days. The monster sneered. Could it be that you took the initiative to take me to the enchantment shops and then the underground black market to lure him out? Liliana, who had stopped the bleeding, asked while enduring the pain. That was just by chance. After all, I really want to figure out the origins of this pendant. After all, the enchantment on it is a defensive barrier specially targeted at Moonrealm spirits. The monster kept its face facing them while slowly turning its body around. You're a lunar monster. Liliana's eyes widened. Lunar monster, what a nostalgic term. Who taught you this? The owner of this pendant. As the monster spoke, his face still had a stiff and warm smile. Liliana's heart sank. She had seen how powerful the lunar monster named Stumbling Demon was. Even if this monster in Rod's skin was a few levels weaker, it wasn't an existence she could resist. Do you know what they are? The black swordsman in front of her suddenly asked. I know a little. I've heard a heretical mage mention it before, Liliana replied hesitantly. Run, the black swordsman ordered. Liz, use fairy fog to bring her out to the usual place. She knows clues about these monsters. Before Liliana could ask who Liz was, a palm-sized girl with dragonfly wings on her back flew out of the black swordsman's chest pocket. She flew to Cass's head and tugged at his ear. Fairy fog can only bring one person out, so cut the big talk. Don't try to act cool by covering the retreat. If you want to run, run together. There's too many. I can't protect her here. Cass looked at the 7 or 8 half-armored skeletons that were gradually approaching and hastily said, "Take her first. I'll knock them all down here before returning." Before he could finish speaking, the 3 skeletons closest to him had already rushed forward. As the tunnel was narrow, Cass couldn't swing the door-like sword in his hand to his heart's content. Therefore, he held the sword horizontally in front of him as a shield, blocking the 2 skeletons' thrusts. Then, he leveraged the sword as a pivot before flying up and kicking the 3rd skeleton to the wall. With a whoosh, the skeleton scattered into bones on the ground. Go! Cass took this opportunity to turn around and shout at the 2 of them. With that said, he raised his huge sword and swung it at the next skeleton. Liz watched Cass rush out and cursed him for being an idiot before flying in front of Liliana. "I'm taking you out. Remember not to speak during this process, and don't try to think about what happened. In fact, don't think about anything. Just empty your mind. Otherwise, you'll be thrown out of the fog." Looking at the fairy in front of her whom she had only seen in textbooks, Liliana subconsciously nodded, but Liz still seemed a little worried. "Why don't I let you sleep first? Nothing will go wrong that way." Wait a minute." Before Liliana could finish speaking, Liz suddenly flapped her wings, and some purple and black scale powder scattered over her face. Then, irresistible drowsiness surged into her heart, and she fell asleep in seconds. "Sorry, I'm in a bad mood now. You'll probably have nightmares later, but there's nothing we can do about it." With that said, Liz flew into the air and danced as if no one was around. As she danced, a fog emitted from her. This fog resembled the fog from the fields in the morning or the forest at night, giving off a dubious feeling. When the fog was thick enough to envelop the 2 of them, Liz stopped and grabbed Liliana's hand. The human and fairy gradually became ethereal and dreamy in the fog as if they would disappear at any moment. With a last gust of wind, the 2 of them disappeared into the dubious fog. Fairy fog was the only displacement spell that didn't require the use of lightning spells to tear through space and perform teleportation. The fairies could temporarily vanish from the world by blurring their existence in the fog, and then use dubious memories to reappear in the world. This was also the reason why many rural legends said that children who ran into the forest's fog would be captured by the fairies. In fact, many children were only lost in the dubious fog created by the fairies, and forgot their existence. It might only be a fleeting moment for them, but by the time they regained their memories, it might be dozens or hundreds of years later. After shattering the last skeleton, Cass raised the sword in his hand and pointed it at the monster. "Quite impressive. No wonder you could send so many of my compatriots back to the moon realm," the monster praised sincerely. "It's your turn to die next." "Die? We won't die. Don't misunderstand." With that said, its hand bent into a few sections like an arthropod. Its palm bloomed like a flower of flesh and blood, and a sharp chitin bone blade extended from its wrist. "Of course, it's indeed quite troublesome to have our bodies destroyed in this world. After all, the contract over the world seal hasn't expired yet. We can only come here through loopholes. A single banishment might mean decades before we can come here again." Cass ignored the other party's deliberate stalling and charged forward to slash at its head. Clang! The monster crossed its arms and blocked the strike with its bone blades. Its face revealed a pleasant smile under the shadow of the huge sword. "Don't be anxious. It's still early." As it spoke, it thrust its hands up, forcing Cass to take 3 steps back. Then, its entire body began to expand. With the sound of flesh tearing, the human skin covering its true face fell off. A moment later, a monster about the height of 2 people with 6 sharp spider spears on its back stood in front of Cass. Its entire body was covered in a shiny chitin shell, and it had compound eyes and a proboscis. It spread its arms as if it was making a declaration. "Now, Bramble's last swordsman, it's time for your long hunt to end." As for Cass, he assumed a charging posture. "It won't end until I kill all of you bastards. Kill us all." Although it no longer had a human face after ripping it off, Cass could tell that the monster's expression was a mocking smile. Crack, crack, crack. The skeletons that had been shattered by Cass, reassembled as if time had reversed. Around Cass, the skeletons shrouded in mist stood up one after another. He was surrounded in the middle. This was the real trap meant for you. Chapter 33 Judgment Bloodline. Cass dodged the first wave of attacks at the cost of 3 wounds on his body. Years of combat experience allowed him to avoid being injured in his vital spots. Although the 3 deep wounds bled profusely, it didn't affect his combat strength for a short period of time. He quickly distanced himself from the skeletons. Although the narrow terrain in the tunnel prevented him from fully unleashing the advantage of the huge sword in his hand, it also prevented him from facing more than 2 enemies at a time. Although the skeletons shrouded in mist looked strange, they weren't a match for him. Cass suspected that even if he didn't swing them with all his might, the weight of the black iron sword alone was enough to shatter them to pieces. The troublesome thing was that despite scattering them, they would reassemble and continue attacking him persistently. Perhaps it was better to say that their fragile and unstable bone joints made the power of every attack easily negated, as if he had punched a puff of smoke. Under such circumstances, he could only scatter the enemies. He couldn't reduce them to bone powder that couldn't be pieced back. If this continued, his stamina would sooner or later be exhausted by these unkillable skeletons. With this in mind, Cass took a deep breath and looked at the half-human, half-spider monster. It was better to ignore those brainless monsters and kill the fellow who was enjoying its front row seats. Cass judged the situation. He didn't believe that the monster's head could be pieced back together. After visually estimating the width of the passageway, Cass swung his huge sword to the greatest extent without flicking his blade. The skeletons blocking him from the spider monster were minced into pieces. He directly leaped across the fragments that had begun to reassemble and rushed forward to fight the spider monster. Sparks constantly flew from the collision of the chitin bone blades and the black iron sword in the dim tunnel. Chinks sounded incessantly. Occasionally, there would be the crisp sound of bones cracking and muffled groans. Clang! Another collision caused Cass's breathing to become a little chaotic. He couldn't help but take half a step back, and his palm felt numb from the impact while gripping the hilt. However, before he could catch his breath, the 2 mist-covered skeletons behind him reconstituted their bodies and attacked him. The narrow space in the tunnel prevented him from directly splitting the 2 skeletons in half. He could only half turn around helplessly and use his sword as a shield to block the other party's attack. Then, he raised his huge sword and stabbed forward, pinning the 2 skeletons to the wall and shattering them into bones. However, before he could pull out his sword, the mist stirred, and the shattered skeletons began to tremble slightly. Under the guidance of a certain force, they were about to reassemble. "Are you done?" Cass, who was surrounded by enemies, steeled his heart and twisted the hilt of his sword. He no longer attempted to conserve strength. With a soft crack, the mechanism on the hilt lodged, and the demon sealing runes buried in the hilt were activated, releasing the magic power sealed inside. Crimson fire runes swarmed over the sword, and the entire black iron sword turned red like a branding iron. The temperature in the tunnel rose rapidly, and the shattered bones on the ground were burned into flying ashes in a few breaths. Level 6 Fire Spell, Breaking Dawn. When he was in the Bramble Mercenaries, he spent a lot of money to get an enchanter to engrave the trump card in this weapon. Cass wasn't a magic chanter to begin with, and because he was wanted, he couldn't recharge the magic power in the demon sealing rune after it was depleted. Therefore, this enchantment could be said to be a trump card that could only be used once. Enchanted Runes. The half-human, half-spider monster looked at the flaming sword in Cass's hand, and for the first time, his voice carried a hint of seriousness. "But you're not a spellblade. How long can you rely on the magic power in this sword?" 2 minutes. 1 minute. It's enough to kill you. The flames of the huge sword formed a curtain of fire that attacked it. Even the monster didn't dare take this powerful strike head-on. The 6 spider spears on its back stabbed into the stone wall as it crawled higher. However, Cass didn't give it a chance to climb up. The flames on his sword transformed into a crescent-shaped flying blade as he brandished it, severing the 3 spider spears on its left. With a crack, it slid down the wall a few meters and barely managed to stabilize itself with the other half of the spider spear, but this distance was enough for Cass to deliver a strike. Seeing the crimson sword slash over, it raised its bone blade to receive it. This time, the chitin bone blade was sliced open like butter. Under the terrifying heat, the sound of cracking came from its appendage-like hands, and an unpleasant charred smell filled the air. Seeing that Cass was about to chop off its head, the monster suddenly shouted, "Mist Nightmare, if you don't make a move, the two of us will return to the moon realm together." With a snick, Cass felt something pierce his body from behind. A strange slippery feeling came from his abdominal cavity. He lowered his head and found that a hand filled with mist had penetrated his stomach. It was the mist on those skeletons. Cass thought as the taste of blood rose in his throat. He turned around. The skeletons from before had scattered and piled up on the ground. The mist that originally enveloped them gathered, forming a blurry humanoid behind him. No wonder they could resurrect infinitely. That layer of mist was the main body of those monsters. Skeletons were just puppets under its control. Cass swallowed the blood in his throat. It was too late to turn around. He planned on beheading the monster in front of him while the enchantment effect was still active. But it was already too late. The other party's severed limb struck his wrist. Coupled with his severely injured abdomen, Cass's hands lost all strength, and the huge sword fell to the ground with a clang. Without his will, the enchanted runes on the sword instantly extinguished, and the black iron sword quickly turned cold. The hand that had pierced him retracted, and Cass's knees buckled as he knelt down. He placed his hands on the ground and panted heavily. "Did you have to wait until now to attack? Didn't you say that you could deal with him alone? The information you gave didn't say that his weapon is sealed with a fire spell specially used to counter demons. I've never seen him use it. How would I know?" "Forget it. Have you found the two who escaped?" "I marked that woman's dream. I've already gotten my subordinates to go over." The two voices seemed to come from afar. Cass, who was gradually losing consciousness, understood their conversation with difficulty. He felt that he couldn't collapse now. He struggled to reach out for the huge sword that had fallen to the ground, but the sword was already too heavy for him. Something slipped out of his chest pocket in his efforts. It was a demon sealing rune that flickered with lightning. "If you feel like you need help one day, crush it." He recalled the words of the gray-haired and silver-eyed mysterious magic chanter. He reached out and pressed down on the demon sealing rune. However, before he could crush it, a sharp sound tore through the air. Whoosh! A silver arrow pierced the spider monster's neck. Before Cass could react to what was happening, the sound of a few more arrows tearing through the air reached his ears. Compound eyes, proboscis, joints, neck, heart. Every silver arrow accurately nailed the monster's vitals. It didn't even leave a word before turning into black salt crystals and dissipating. Cass turned his head. Not far away was a tall blonde woman wearing a triangular hat and light leather armor. At this moment, she was half kneeling on the ground as she aimed an exquisite repeating crossbow in his direction. Seeing that the spider monster had already begun to dissipate, the woman turned to shoot at the blurry mist humanoid. However, the arrow only penetrated the wall behind it and didn't cause any effective damage. Upon seeing this, the blonde woman decisively threw down the repeating crossbow, drew the silver rapier she wore at her waist, and rushed over in her long leather boots. The misty humanoid transformed its hands into two sharp short swords as it charged forward. "What are you?" The woman ignored the misty figure's words and elegantly dodged the other party's attack like a swan. Then, she slashed with her sword, leaving a faint silver trajectory with the rapier. The moment the human-shaped mist touched the silver light, it dissipated like the morning fog seeing sunlight. With just one strike, the misty humanoid disappeared without a trace. The blonde woman nimbly retracted her sword and extended her hand to Cass. "I'm sorry I'm late. It's an honor to meet you." "Who are you?" Cass asked hoarsely. He had never seen such a person if his memories hadn't failed him. "Who I am isn't important. What's important is your identity." The woman's voice was very cold and straightforward. "Identity? Do you mean as a mercenary or a wanted criminal, or a person who is about to die?" Cass forced a laugh. The woman shook her head, her expression unchanged like a puppet. "We've been looking for you for a long time, Cass Durant, the last bloodline of Blake Saba." Cass asked with blood in his mouth. "Whose bloodline?" "Blake Saba, fourth of the 13 judges' bloodline of the Black Swordsman." Chapter 34. Sage of Scorching Scars. The dim light, the turbid air, and the quiet environment where only his footsteps could be heard. Every time he came to the mine, Vincent would recall something from a long time ago. "Look at them, Vincent. Take a good look at them." At that time, Simon Wald, who hadn't become the Duke of Thorn, stood on a high spot and pointed at the miners working below as he spoke to him, who was still an expert mage back then. They toil in the dark mines for more than 10 hours a day with no safety measures. What can such hard work be exchanged for? Is it only enough for a living, one that plagues them with illnesses? Simon's eyes seemed to be burning with fire. As they breathe the air in the mine, most of the miners who have worked here for more than 20 years will suffer from silver lung disease because they inhale too much elementium silver dust. It's said that their chests will feel as if they're burning painfully every time they breathe. But guess what they call this? There was no trace of a smile on Simon's face. Inheritance. This is because, after they die, their family members can sell the lungs to the black market's alchemists at a high price. They can extract crystallized elementium silver from them. Even so, the Thieves Guild that controls the black market still takes a considerable commission. What's their mantra? There's a moral code among thieves. With that said, Simon Wald covered his face and laughed maniacally. Why are you telling me this? Vincent waited until Simon was out of breath from laughing until he started a fit of coughs before slowly asking, "Help me?" Simon suddenly calmed down and extended his hand to Vincent. "Help me become the next Duke of Thorn. Help me regain the elementium silver industry from the Empire, and help me make the Blackwater province eternally free from the restraints of the royal family, the Astral Council, and the Church." Even today, he didn't regret his decision that day. He cursed the Duke's heir, barged into the Holy Sepulchre where his ancestors rested to seek strength, expelled the Empire's envoy, and fought a platinum ring battle mage. Even though he violated the astral laws because of this, causing him to never advance to the legendary domain in his life, and even though his methods were too tyrannical, causing his wife to be assassinated by the conservatives, he never regretted it at all. All of this is a necessary sacrifice. The man sitting on the Thorn Throne who was becoming colder and colder had said this to him. He took back the elementium silver industry, but he squeezed the miners even harder than the Empire. He expelled the Thieves Guild, but he created an even crueler underground black market. In order to fulfill his ideals, he had almost gone in the opposite direction of his former ideals. In order to resist the Empire, he had to firmly hold power in his hands and squeeze out the last bit of power in Blackwater province. But compared to the Empire's 800-year heritage, that strength was still insufficient. He could understand Vincent. However, even he began to wonder if the price he had to pay for that dream was too heavy. Holy Sepulchre. If the Duke really wanted to master the power of the Holy Sepulchre and awaken the millions of corpses buried in the cemetery for thousands of years as his army, would it really be an ideal country to rule? A country filled with the dead? More importantly, how could he guarantee that he could truly control that power? The rotten moon tide of the undead 1,000 years ago was the Blackwater King's failed attempt back then. The final outcome was a natural disaster that could have destroyed the entire Blackwater Kingdom. If not for the Doomsday Watchers at their peak and the hero William Kane killing the out-of-control Blackwater King at the critical moment, the entire Blackwater province would probably be a silent kingdom of the dead. Vincent thought about it and turned the last corner. Then, his vision cleared up. It was an overly wide hall compared to the narrow mine from before. There was a small skull mountain in the middle of the hall. There was a pattern of dragons and snakes devouring each other on the rock walls around the hall, emitting a faint silver light. However, his gaze was completely drawn to the gray-haired, silver-eyed man in front of the skull temple. Hello. The person wore a miner's uniform and held a purple-robed wooden magical medium. Beside him stood a thin youth. The person greeted him politely when he saw him walk in. Vincent couldn't tell the level of the person in front of him. As a magic chanter whose mental strengths had been tempered to the threshold of the legendary stage and yet not seen through the other party's level, this was enough to determine the other party's level. Peak Master? Or Legendary? But as a heretical mage who can't obtain magic power from the astral laws, where can he obtain enough magic fuel to maintain his level? As his thoughts raced, Vincent asked, "Were you the one who killed the supervisor and took away the other half of the miners?" "Yes," the other party nodded and replied without any hesitation. "Then, you didn't choose to leave with them. Can I take it that you're provoking the entire Thorn City?" Vincent asked. "Then, can I take it that you're provoking the entire Vic continent by setting up a shrine worshipping the Moon Realm?" Here. The other party knew about the Moon Realm, so his magic power fuel came from a Moon Realm contract? According to the information revealed by the other party's words, Vincent adjusted his countermeasures in his heart. The three moon goddesses have always been the faith of the Blackwater swamp. She's even older than the 7 holy spirits, he replied. So those miners willingly let the soul-ingesting spider demon parasitize their bodies. As the person spoke, he pointed his purple yew staff at the webweaver's corpse in a corner. Only then did Vincent notice the dead webweaver's corpse. Corpse? Why would a moon realm spirit leave behind a corpse after death? Something incomprehensible had happened. Why did it leave a body behind? The person responded expressionlessly. Of course, it's because it's already dead. That's impossible, Vincent blurted out. Lunar monsters were essentially a thought concept or something metaphysical. It was impossible to kill them with magic and swords. But as you can see, this has already happened. Let's not talk about this first. You're a little stronger than the people I've seen before. Even among the people I know, you can be considered third-rate. I believe you have some status in this city, right? My name is Vincent. Do you understand now? Who? Vincent fell silent. Did the other party not even know who he was? Then, how did he turn the Silver Stream mine upside down alone? Vincent wasn't someone who cared about his reputation. Be it the titles of the number 1 person below the legendary stage or sage of scorching scars, they were all given by the nosy. However, he wasn't against those titles. Many times, a resounding title was much easier than teaching a fool a lesson. But the person in front of him, Vincent von Bergman, Duke Simon's chief palace mage, he added. This time, a change in expression finally appeared on the other party's face. That last name. Who's Liliana to you? Chapter 35. Divine Realm, who's Liliana to you? In fact, William already had a rough answer before he asked this question. However, he still wanted to hear the person in front of him say it personally. The other party fell silent for a moment, and the expression on his face kept changing. Finally, he replied, "She's my daughter." "Where did you learn this name?" As expected, William couldn't help but have the urge to laugh when he sensed the vigilance in the other party's words. He said to the middle-aged man who called himself the chief palace mage and claimed that the 3 moon goddesses was an ancient belief of the Blackwater swamp. "Then, are you aware that your daughter was almost eaten by the spawn of the 3 moon goddesses about a week ago? What were you doing back then? Worshipping the statue of the Lady of Starvation in this mine?" "I was searching for her back then. I didn't know that she had encountered a newborn goddess's dependent." Vincent was silent for a moment before answering. The newborn goddess was the Lady of Starvation in the Moon Realm worship of the ancient Blackwater Kingdom. Similarly, the Whispering Empress and the Lord of Nightmare were respectively called the Goddess of Transformation and the Goddess of Art. In that case, you know that the Lady of Starvation's spawn eats humans? William asked. He waited for a while and continued when Vincent didn't say anything. "Then, you treated them as your faith and worshipped a man-eating deity." Vincent shook his head at William's words. Strength is strength. How to use it is only related to the user's will. The same power can be used to kill or save people. My daughter is in danger because that magic chanter wanted to kill her, and that's not the will of the newborn goddess. This familiar explanation again. William had the urge to facepalm. In-game, every time he questioned Moon Realm worshippers who could still communicate normally, they always gave the same answer. He didn't expect them to remain the same more than 1,000 years later. Their gods weren't in the wrong, but the believers who had chanted the wrong scriptures and abused their powers. William scoffed at this. "There are many ways to obtain strength," he said. "Be it tempering one's skills, practicing magic, or establishing a faction, these powers belong to yourself after obtaining them. No one can snatch them from your hands. However, the powers obtained from trading with the Moon Realm aren't like this." As William spoke, he looked at the corpse of the webweaver. No matter how powerful or convenient that power is, the power from the Moon Realm is something the Void Sovereigns lend out. Those things will never belong to you. Furthermore, one day, they'll make you spit them out with interest. You didn't come here to destroy the altar and take away the miners just to give me a lesson in faith, right? Vincent interrupted William's preaching and continued. "You're the heretical mage who saved my daughter in the Grief Mountains, right? I asked her about your identity and whereabouts, but she refused to say anything. She only said that you're a wandering heretical mage and didn't want to cause too much trouble." As he spoke, The corners of his mouth twitched as he looked at the ruined temple. She probably didn't expect you to cause such trouble here. However, no matter what your goal is, please accept my gratitude for saving my daughter. As Vincent spoke, he bowed to him solemnly. If you're willing to leave here, I guarantee on my reputation that no one will fault you. Although that's what I would like to say, your choice of staying despite being able to use teleportation means that you have something to discuss with us, right? William nodded. That's why I need to confirm if your status in this city is worth talking to, Vincent replied bluntly. Tell me what you want. William looked at the picture of the dragon and snake devouring each other and replied, put what I want aside for now. Let me tell you what you want first. William stared into Vincent's eyes and said, you want the Blackwater Swamp to become independent from the Real Empire. Upon hearing the other party's words, Vincent said with a calm expression, only a lunatic would have such thoughts. William shook his head and pointed at the rock wall. Do you know what this pattern on the rock wall represents? Vincent looked at the pattern on the rock wall that was gradually dimming and replied, the Bronze Era's primitive faith totem in the Blackwater Swamp, the dragon god Oka who symbolizes royalty, and the snake god Vera who symbolizes death. This painting of tail devouring shows that they are undergoing an eternal battle. Vincent paused and continued, however, these myths have been proven to be partly the truth of real myths since the creation model of the 7 Holy Spirits was proposed. No one will believe this now, so why are you asking me this? Are you sure you want to continue your act in front of me? William asked. Vincent hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. The king and rebel ritual allows the executor to obtain the power of legends by reproducing the mirror image of an ancient myth. I'll be straightforward. This ritual isn't enough to free you from the Empire's control. The strength of ceremonial magic is closely related to the extent to which the executor restores the myths. Otherwise, wouldn't I be able to obtain the mighty power of the mythical god king if I joined an underground gang and killed the gang leader, the king, as a rebel? The world isn't that simple. Let's not talk about the power of the legendary god king. Even if you want a person to directly step into the divine realm, the materials for your ritual might require the assassination of the current emperor to satisfy the conditions of the ritual. And if he could publicly kill the emperor of the empire, why would he need a king and rebel ritual to obtain strength? What are you trying to say? Vincent frowned and asked. I can help you become independent from the empire, but I need you to give me the corresponding remuneration. You? What makes you say so? With this, as William spoke, he slammed the magical medium in his hand on the ground. An extremely complicated blue clock pattern unfolded around it, encompassing the entire temple hall. It was as if a bell was chiming from afar. Vincent felt a ridiculously powerful magical power infuse into the clock pattern through the magical medium before spreading to every corner of the hall. Then, the pattern disappeared, and the surroundings returned to normal. However, Vincent felt that a great spell that might require several magic choirs to cast had taken effect. He observed his surroundings, but there didn't seem to be any special changes. What did you just do? Vincent asked solemnly. The other party didn't answer him. Instead, he bent down and picked up a handful of slag before scattering it into the sky. The slag stopped in midair. Time stopped. Frost-type Divine Realm spell, 0 entropy. The magic chanter in front of him had already reached the Divine Realm? What was magic? According to the theory of the Tekma Church, the founder of the classical magic system, and the creation model of the 7 Holy Spirits built by the First Crown in the first year of the Platinum Calendar, magic was a transformation from unresolved possibilities to confirmed facts. The material world in the world was a confirmed reality, so ores were ores, steel was steel, and swords were swords. If one wanted to turn ores into swords, one had to burn and smelt them into steel. Then, they had to forge steel into swords. Not one step could be missed. However, for magic chanters, they could skip all the steps. A mage proficient in transformation could transform ores into swords, and a powerful illusion mage could even draw a sword from the void. This was because in the eyes of a true magic chanter, be it ores, steel, or swords, these observable substances were only embellishments. Their essence was solidified magic power. Everything is magic. This was the core of the Tekma Church's theory. At the same time, it was the cornerstone of modern magical theory. Everything, including the operation of the astral laws, had to follow this ironclad rule. In the Tekma Church's framework, The original world was a place with only light, and light was endless magic that contained infinite possibilities. In a huge event called creation, a portion of magic power left the realm of light and sank and solidified, turning into this solid and certain physical world. This concept inspired Proteus to propose a model of the creation of the 7 Holy Spirits, ultimately creating the Holy Spirit Church that unified the entire Vic continent's mythological system. Of course, this was all in the future. Matter was solidified magic, or it could be said to be the magic of death. Therefore, magic chanters couldn't use them to change reality. At most, they could only use them as a medium. All the magic chanters could use were active magic power from the realm of light that had never participated in the creation of the world. They used the astral world, the moon realm, and everyone's souls to flow into the world, turning them into the constantly changing power of the physical world. Otherwise, the entire world would be a rigid specimen. Therefore, when magic chanters used magic, even if it was only a level 1 trick, it was essentially a miniature Genesis. The magic chanters were like the 7 Holy Spirits of creation. They guided the magic power of the light realm to the world and used the concept in their minds to transform the infinite possibilities of magic power into solid reality. From this perspective, there wasn't much difference among magic chanters. After all, what they did was use magic to reconstruct reality. The things that truly divided their strength were easier. The scale and depth of power. Scale was very easy to understand. It was obvious at a glance who was stronger between a mage who could only blow leaves and a mage who could stir up a storm. Vincent had seen many people constantly study and explore the scale of magic. Even the current Astral Council regarded the scale of strength as the most important quantitative standard for mages. However, after reaching Vincent's level and status, he gradually understood that the true standard to determine the strength of a magic chanter should be the depth of their strength. True magic should be a miracle, not a tool. It was very simple to light a branch. Even mortals without magic could rely on drilling wood to light it up. It was not a big deal even if an entire forest was burned to ashes. Even without using magic, just letting a spark land on a withered branch at the right time could do the same deed. Anyone could do it. This was because wood burning was a part of the world's laws. Using magic only compressed the preparations needed to light them. The depth of strength was the level that magic had come into contact with the rules of the world. Ignition of the forest didn't reflect this. Letting steel, rocks, or even water or frost burn, creating miracles that couldn't have happened, was the embodiment of the depth of strength. Stopping time involved the deepest and most basic rules of the world. Among all the creation gods, time was always the first thing to appear. Or rather, the concept of sequence originated from the appearance of time. Changing time was a miracle that only magic chanters who had reached the divine realm could complete. However, how is this possible? Vincent asked. His tone was more indignant than puzzled. How can anyone step into the divine realm under the tyranny of the astral laws? Now, even if he wanted to advance to the legendary stage, he had to obtain the approval of 2/3 of the Astral Council members. Those spots had basically been monopolized by the royal family and other noble families. This was also an important reason why he followed Duke Simon and sought the independence of the Blackwater province. He was even willing to indulge his colleagues' moon realm beliefs. As long as the astral laws continued hanging above every magic chanter's head, one had to obtain the Astral Council's approval to open up the path to the astral world for advancement. Without the authority to enter the astral world, one would be like Vincent. Even if one's mental strength had long crossed the threshold of the legendary stage, one would not be able to obtain enough magic power to support the scale and depth of their strengths. They would only have the title of the number 1 person below the legendary stage. If he wanted to bypass the astral laws to obtain enough strength without killing the innocent and using a large number of souls as his magical power fuel, he could only do it through the moon realm or ritual magic. If this was the case at the legendary level, there was no need to mention the legendary divine realm. It was said that because the amount of magic power required by divine realm magic chanters was too large, the magic power pathways built in the astral world might be consumed because they couldn't withstand their power. Therefore, there were less than 5 divine realm magic chanters in the entire empire. Moreover, they had to suppress their realm to the legendary level all year round to avoid destroying the astral laws. Here was this man in front of him, whom he had never seen before, casually using a divine realm level spell. This was unacceptable to him. The person said, "This power is more reliable than trading with the Void Sovereigns and going through an incomplete king and rebel ritual, right?" "Who are you?" Vincent asked in a deep voice. The other party's words were filled with disdain for the Moon Realm. Unless this attitude was fake, it was impossible for his strength to come from the Moon Realm. If he wanted to reach the Divine Realm by extracting the souls of mortals, he had to imprison at least half of Thorn City's population's souls as a source of magic power. Therefore, the man's magic power could only come from the astral world. However, he wasn't restricted by the astral laws. How was this possible? Unless he was a magic chanter who had reached the divine realm before the astral laws were established. Vincent shook his head in his heart. No mortal could live for so long. "You can call me presiding judge. If you agree to my conditions, I'll be the person who can fulfill your long-cherished wish," the person said. The slag that stopped in midair landed with a faint rustling sound. Vincent asked, "Then what are your conditions? What do you want?" "What I want is," as the other party spoke, he opened his hand before clasping it tightly. "Everything." The game, Doomsday Watchers, had a total of 4 endings. The best outcome was the full moon ending. After the heroes of the Doomsday Watchers sealed the Moon Realm crack, they undid their armor and returned to the fields, becoming legends. Williams' transmigration followed on from this perfect ending save. The normal ending was the new moon ending. Although the protagonist had repelled the Moon Realm's invasion, the largest crack couldn't be closed. The Doomsday Watchers activated the Eternal Watch at Twilight Fortress. Then, it was the ending of the waning moon. The protagonist sacrificed his soul and transformed into the incarnation of the 7 Holy Spirits, returning the 3 Void Sovereigns who had already stepped into the world to the Moon Realm. However, after the protagonist sacrificed himself, the next invasion was already brewing in the Moon Realm. The darkest ending was the Eclipse ending. The protagonist betrayed the Doomsday Watchers and turned into the 14th Void Sovereign. Together with the other Void Sovereigns, he used the world as his chessboard to control mortals' fates. William was dissatisfied with every outcome, especially the last one. If it weren't for the sake of collecting all the achievements, he wouldn't have touched that outcome. The reason was very simple. The Void Sovereigns who addressed others as mortals in-game and casually played with the fates of others were disgusting. As for the game developers, they didn't design an outcome that allowed the gamers to charge into the Moon Realm and chop off the heads of those Void Sovereigns. In fact, the Void Sovereigns didn't even show their health bars in-game. The protagonist could only fight their incarnations. William didn't know if he would have a chance to beat up the Void Sovereigns if this game released a sequel. But since he had transmigrated here and wasn't suppressed by the developer's plot framework, he had a chance to make up for that regret. It was just like an extremely controversial game from the beginning of the century. If it weren't for the fact that there wasn't such an option in-game, he would definitely have personally killed the enemy, who had blown up his adoptive father's head, with a golf club instead of choosing to forgive her. Of course, dealing with the Moon Realm was a war, not a simple RPG adventure. Therefore, he had to seize power first. "Everything? What does everything include?" Vincent asked solemnly. "What is included doesn't matter," William said. "Everything is everything. This mine, the entire Elementium silver industry, Thorn City, Blackwater Province, and most importantly the people under your rule. You want to be the king of Blackwater Province. I will choose a more suitable person to be the king of Blackwater Province, but that person won't be me." If anyone else said this, Vincent would only treat them as lunatics. However, if a magic chanter who had reached the divine realm said this, it was spoken with a completely different weight. Many people said that at least half of the reason why Duke Simon could sit firmly on the Thorn Throne despite his tyrannical rule was that he had a trump card. The number 1 person under the legendary stage was loyal to him. Vincent didn't completely agree with this, but he had to admit that his existence gave Duke Simon a lot more confidence when making radical changes. If Duke Simon's political enemies had a magic chanter of the same strength as him, the balance would definitely have been broken. And this was only at the peak of the Master Domain. What about the Legendary Domain? What about the Divine Realm? Vincent had no doubt that the person in front of him had the ability to turn the entire Thorn City upside down, so he didn't question it and said directly, "You choose a king and make that person a puppet you control?" "Sir, we seek independence from the Empire to prevent our fate from being controlled by others. Therefore, you chose to let your fate be controlled by the Void Sovereigns? That's really a good choice. So you don't deny that the new ruler will become your puppet. That person will agree with my philosophy and won't have a relationship with the Moon Realm. If you think this is my puppet, I have nothing to say. What's your philosophy? Vincent stared into William's eyes and asked. The other party pondered for a moment before answering. Humans will never have their fates controlled by deities. The words he had said previously weren't even half as arrogant as this sentence. For a moment, Vincent didn't know how to reply to him. Vincent muttered after a long time, "This is impossible. Even someone as powerful as William Kane couldn't sever the connection between the Moon Realm and the world." That's because he didn't have that condition previously, but he does now. The person didn't elaborate on the specific conditions and continued speaking. "I'm willing to tell you all this because I know your daughter and she more or less helped me previously." Vincent couldn't help but feel a headache when he heard William's words. "You've done well, Liliana," Vincent thought. However, what right did an apprentice-level magic chanter like her have to help a mage from the divine realm? William ignored the other party's strange expression and continued. "On the other hand, it's because I've noticed that you don't have the aura of the Moon Realm on you since you came in. Therefore, although you claim to be a believer of the Moon Realm, you haven't really made a deal with the Moon Realm so far, right?" Vincent nodded slowly. Using the ancient faith of the three goddesses to replace the 7 holy spirits was the Duke's plan. In fact, he had been against it from the beginning. As for the reason, it was just as he had said. Handing their fate from the Empire to the Void Sovereign might not be the right choice. However, they were both controlled by others. The gods might not be merciful, but the price of mortal greed was greater than the gods. After retrieving the Elementium silver industry, the Empire tightened its taxes on Blackwater Province year after year, increasing its support for adversarial families, reducing the allocation of spots for the Blackwater Province's magic chanters, and mobilizing many legions at the border between Blackwater Province and Platinum Province for various reasons. These practical pressures couldn't be ignored. In addition, the Holy Sepulchre, which Duke Simon used as his final trump card, needed the help of the three goddesses to awaken the power there. Therefore, even from the most pragmatic point of view, replacing the 7 holy spirits with the three goddesses' faith was imperative. Just like many other choices, these were necessary sacrifices. However, Vincent only believed in his strengths. Therefore, he had never chosen to embrace the power of the Moon Realm like his fellow mages. Even though the Duke had found him a powerful Moon Realm spirit that could allow him to break through the limits of the legendary stage, he chose to give up that opportunity. On this point, he held the same opinion as the mysterious magic chanter in front of him. He just couldn't agree because of his standpoint. Strength is yours. Others will never be able to snatch it away. Power borrowed from elsewhere ultimately doesn't belong to me. So what do you mean? Vincent asked when he thought of this. Didn't you say that becoming the king of Blackwater Province with my help would only make you my puppet? William smiled and said, "Then, if you have enough faith in your will, you can be this puppet. What do you think?" When Cass woke up, he found himself lying in a simple tavern guest room. The air was filled with the faint smell of herbs. He shuddered and wanted to sit up, but a cold hand pressed down on his chest and pressed him back onto the bed with a force that didn't match her slenderness. "Don't move. Your wound hasn't been treated," a cold female voice sounded. Cass turned his head. Sitting beside the bed was the blonde woman. She wore a triangular hat with white feathers and tight leather armor that allowed her to move easily. At that moment, she was focused on applying some green ointment to his abdomen. This person was the woman who had saved him from the mist monster. Cass noticed that there was an upward sharp horn symbol on the chest of the other party's leather armor that consisted of 2 rough straight lines. Cass recognized this symbol. It was the symbol of the 8th Order of the Holy Spirit Church. The symbol of the Holy Spirit Church was a 7-pointed star. Every corner symbolized a holy spirit worshipped by the church, representing father, mother, elder, lady, youth, child, and the dead. However, the 8th Holy Spirit, hermit, wasn't included in this symbol. Back then, after Terra I completed his great undertaking of unifying the Vic continent and ascended to the 8th Holy Spirit as a mortal, the Holy Spirit Church had debated for more than half a century about how the Additional 8th Holy Spirit should belong to the Holy Spirit canon. Some people believe that the 8th Holy Spirit wasn't included in the creation model proposed by the first crown. Terra was only another prophet. Some people also believed that the creation model of the 7 Holy Spirits wasn't perfect and needed a Holy Spirit that had been elevated from a mortal to make up for the last missing piece. Finally, in the 8th amnesty decree issued by the 66th Holy Spirit Pope, the Pius Palatu, it was clarified that the 8th Holy Spirit, Hermit, existed as a hidden Holy Spirit and couldn't be mentioned at the public Mass of the 7 Holy Spirits. Its symbol wasn't included in the 7-pointed star symbol of the Holy Spirit Church, but changed to a separate sharp horn as a symbol. From then on, the 8th Order became semi-independent from the Holy Spirit Church. Compared to the Holy Spirit Church, it was closer to the Empire's royal family. "Are you from the church?" Cass asked. The other party grunted as a reply. "Can you tell me your name?" "Nizemar," the woman replied. "Did you save me?" "I guess." "Thank you." Cass recalled the scene before he lost consciousness. Back then, he could see his internal organs through the wound that had penetrated his abdominal cavity. "I didn't expect to still be alive." He originally thought that he was doomed. "No, you're actually dead," Nizemar said calmly, her tone terrifyingly calm. Cass subconsciously reached under his nose to confirm that he wasn't breathing. After Cass confirmed that he was still breathing normally, Nizemar slowly continued, "However, the life link between that fairy and you saved you. The life scale powder maintained your life, and I happen to be a healer. I've already stabilized that fatal wound with hands of healing, but it will probably take some time for you to fully recover. Why don't you finish your sentence at once?" Cass helplessly lowered his hand. Nizemar continued. Expressionlessly, "However, you can rest assured. Even if you really die, I'll immediately apply to the local Holy Spirit Church to use resuscitation to revive you." Resuscitation was a LV9 life spell that was nearly legendary. Moreover, it could only be used by the clergy of the Holy Spirit Church with the help of the Shrine of the 7 Holy Spirits. The effect of this spell was to revive a person whose corpse was intact and had died for less than 6 hours. Of course, the resurrection didn't come without a price. The essence of this spell was for the caster to transfer their life force to the dead. If not for a few magic chanters using this spell together, it would basically be a life for a life. According to what Cass knew, the Holy Spirit Church had always been in decline in Blackwater Province. He estimated that only the Bishop of St. Dewey Cathedral in Thorn City could use this spell. Using the life of a bishop in exchange for the life of a wanted criminal? How was that possible? Cass was amused by the other party's words. "You don't believe me." As Nizemar spoke, she tore off a bandage with her white teeth. Cass shook his head and said, "Now, more than half of the city wants me dead, and you're telling me that the high and mighty bishop is willing to sacrifice his life to save me. Would you believe it if you were in my shoes?" Nizemar replied, "If you're only a wanted criminal, then there's indeed no value in doing so. But compared to the wanted criminals in Thorn City, you have a more important identity." The other party's words reminded Cass of the episode before he fainted. Judge. The last bloodline of the Black Swordsman, Blake Sava. He extracted a few keywords from his scattered memories and asked in confusion, "What exactly is that?" "You should know about the Doomsday Watchers and William Kane, right?" Cass nodded. There probably weren't many people in the world who didn't know. Other than creating the Doomsday Watchers, William Kane also created another organization called the Judges. Or rather, the original Doomsday Watchers was only a peripheral organization of the Judges. As she spoke, she bandaged Cass's wound. "There are a total of 13 judges, including William Kane. Of course, that includes your ancestor, Blake Sava. All of them are heroes whose skills had reached the divine realm." His original goal in creating the Judges was to resist. As she spoke, she suddenly stopped and asked Cass, "Do you know what those monsters that almost killed you were?" Cass, who was about to complain that the other party had stopped mid-sentence, instantly turned solemn when he heard this question. He replied, "I'm not sure. I only know that they're a little similar to magical creatures summoned by summoning spells, but they're different from puppets that only listen to the summoner. They have very high intelligence. In addition, they will turn into black salt crystals and dissipate after death without leaving any traces." "Do you know what they are?" "Lunar monsters." Nizemar first said their names before explaining. "To put it simply, the moon realm is a magical plane. There are things called lunar monsters living inside. They are usually manifestations of certain concepts, such as conspiracy, rot, destruction, temptation, and so on. Due to their nature, they are very willing to come to the world to practice their ideals. In fact, 1,000 years ago, they almost dragged the entire Vic continent to the brink of destruction, but, Cass finished her sentence. But William Kane and the judges he established defeated them. Nizemar nodded and said, yes. Then why didn't any of the legendary stories about William Kane mention anything about the judges? Cass asked. There are many reasons and they're very complicated. However, one of the most important ones is to prevent more people from coming into contact with knowledge related to the moon realm and prevent the tragedy from happening again. You have to know that because of the world shell, those lunar monsters usually can't take the initiative to appear in the world unless someone summons them from this side, Cass said in a deep voice. Although he wasn't a magic chanter, he still knew some general principles of magic. For example, if he wanted to summon things that didn't exist in this world, he had to use human will as a beacon as guidance. Nizemar nodded. Someone had summoned the lunar monsters who had killed his friends. Then do you know who summoned them? Cass asked anxiously. This time, Nizemar smiled for the first time. A mocking smile. Do you really want to know? I can tell you the answer now. For the first time, there was a briskness in her voice. Someone I can't touch, right? Cass fell silent for a moment before asking. If you don't choose to cooperate with us, that'll be someone you'll never be able to reach. Nizemar's voice returned to its previous coldness. Cass asked, what do I need to help you? Nizemar replied, simple. You need to help us retrieve a sword from the underground holy sepulchre of Thorn City's graveyard, a sword that only you can pull out. A sword? Cass asked in confusion. Yes, a sword. That sword's name is Judgment 4. Judgment 4? Is there another sword called Judgment 3? Upon hearing the name that didn't sound like a weapon, Cass asked half-jokingly. Unexpectedly, Nizemar nodded and replied, yes, and there's not just Judgment 4 and Judgment 3. There are a total of 12 judgment weapons, from Judgment 1 to Judgment 12. Holding them is a symbol of a judge's status, and your ancestor, Blake Saba, was the holder of Judgment 4. Logically speaking, Cass should feel honored. However, he really didn't feel anything for his ancestor from more than 1,000 years ago. Even if that person was really a hero whose skills had reached the divine realm like this woman said, it didn't affect Cass's being wanted throughout the city. Therefore, he directly asked, so is there anything special about that sword called Judgment 4? As Nizemar bandaged him, she said, do you remember how many lunar monsters you killed? Upon hearing her suddenly ask this question out of the blue, Cass replied, it's written all over the wanted posters on the streets and alleys. A total of 28. However, she only shook her head and said, unfortunately, the real answer is 0. Cass asked in confusion, why? I'm very sure that I killed every lunar monster in the host's bodies. At this moment, Nizemar was holding Cass's waist with her cold hand before tying the bandages around his back. After doing this, she said calmly, but they ultimately turned into black salt crystals and dissipated, right? This means that they were only banished back to the moon realm. Their essence won't be affected at all. In the future, as long as there's a chance, they can cross through the world shell countless times. Therefore, you haven't really killed any lunar monsters. Nizemar's words swayed Cass's heart. For so many days, his obsession with revenge had been driving him forward. But if the truth was as she said, and he was facing a group of monsters that he could never truly kill, wouldn't his persistence be meaningless? However, Cass quickly calmed down. He took a few deep breaths and asked, so what does what you're saying have to do with the sword named Judgment 4? Nizemar happened to finish tying the bandage at this moment. She picked up a handkerchief that was folded at the side and wiped the blood and sweat on her hand before saying calmly, mortal weapons and magic can't really kill lunar monsters, but judgment weapons are one of the few weapons that can completely kill them. With that said, she put down her handkerchief and got up to leave. Cass stopped her. Wait, you haven't told me who summoned those lunar monsters. Nizemar looked down at him and asked, I can tell you, but have you considered accepting that answer? Cass nodded slowly. Tell me who it is. Nizemar's lips moved as she said a name he couldn't believe. Simon Wald, the guardian of the Blackwater province and the current Duke of Thorns. This name stunned Cass for a long time. He had thought that it might be a noble, archmage, or someone of high status in Thorn City. However, he never expected that the man who ruled the entire Blackwater province would be the tyrant who had ruled Thorn City with an iron fist for more than 20 years. Perhaps I should have known, Cass thought. In the beginning, their mercenary group was hired by Duke Simon's faction to investigate the strange sounds the miners heard in the Silver Stream mine. Then, his teammates encountered those monsters and were sacrificed. If he hadn't met Liz by chance, he would probably have died inside. Then, with Liz's help, he infiltrated the Silver Stream mine again and found the parasitized miner, hoping to find out the truth. However, he was attacked by the other party, and had no choice but to kill him. Less than a day later, he was wanted by the entire city. Previously, he only suspected that a higher-up had been parasitized by that monster, but after understanding the form of the lunar monster, everything made sense. After a long time, Cass asked, why did he summon those lunar monsters? Nizemar replied, we're also investigating the exact reason. The most likely guess is that Duke Simon might want to summon a Void Sovereign to the world to achieve his goals. What's a Void Sovereign? Cass asked. The pinnacle of lunar monsters. They require an entire lunar domain to explain their concepts. Just a whisper from them can incite the suspicion and betrayal of the crowd. Just a roar can stir up war and storms. Just a thought can determine the fate of mortals. Cass felt like he was listening to a myth. Can the Duke succeed? Very likely. What happens if he succeeds? What happens depends on which Void Sovereign he summons. But the final outcome should be suffering. Is there a way to stop him? Yes. What is it? We need an outstanding swordsman and a sword that can completely kill a lunar monster. This is also the reason why we're looking for you. Me. Cass pointed at his nose and said in amusement, why? Just because I can pull out that sword. The sword is very important, but what's more important is the person wielding the sword. You're one of the few people in this city who still has the spirit to resist. If it can be done with spirit alone, I'm afraid there won't be so many tragedies in this world. That's because you're facing the difficulties of the world. Against existences at the Moon Realm, your will is truly the most important weapon. Rest well. We'll come to you soon. With that said, Nizemar turned around and left. When she reached the door, Cass, who suddenly thought of something pressing, stopped her again. This time, he sat up from the bed and shouted, wait, can you bring me out of the city now? There's a small wooden hut in the middle of the black pine forest. My friend is still. Nizemar didn't reply or stop. Instead, she struck the large vase at the door before leaving, closed the door, and left. Just as Cass was about to get off the bed and chase after her, Liz flew out of the vase with an unhappy expression. Cass gaped at her. You. Watching Liz fly to his bed with a gloomy expression, Cass didn't seem to know how to say anything other than you. Take her first. I'll knock them all down here. Before returning, Liz imitated Cass's line from the tunnel in an exaggerated tone. Then, she spread her arms with a dark expression and slapped Cass's cheeks with both hands. Liar. Cass looked away guiltily. His life was essentially lent to him by Liz, but he had been taking risks. Although he didn't know how much life-scale powder Liz had consumed to maintain his life force when he was severely injured, the fairy's face was a little paler than before. How did you get here? Didn't you agree to wait for me at that wooden hut? Cass changed the topic. Unexpectedly, these words completely stirred the little fairy's emotions. She rubbed Cass's face with both hands and said, how dare you mention my cabin? After I brought the girl through the fairy fog, a few monsters somewhat like dreams and mist quickly followed me. I protected the unconscious girl while dealing with them and was almost eaten. Furthermore, the garden that I had painstakingly built was destroyed by them. What happened then? Cass didn't push her away as usual and continued asking. His voice also sounded comical because the other party kept tugging at his cheek. Later on, if not for the big sister with the crossbow rushing over, that girl and I would have died there. Big sister? Upon hearing this word, Cass's expression turned strange. Wasn't this fairy in front of him 200 years old? An intense pain suddenly came from his cheek. Liz yanked his face. Don't start thinking of impolite things. She looks older than me, so I have to call her big sister. But I haven't said anything. Cass thought helplessly, but at the realization that whatever he said would only serve to make her angrier, he ultimately chose to shut up and let her yank his face. After the other party calmed down a little, Cass asked curiously, "So why did you hide in that vase just now?" "I just wanted to see your reaction. I wanted to see how long it would take you to remember that your master might still be waiting for you alone in that wooden hut." "That's it?" Cass asked in disbelief. "Why, isn't this reason enough?" Liz sat cross-legged in midair, looking furious. "In the end, you only thought of me when that big sister was about to leave. Why? Have you forgotten who your master is because of the blonde beauty? What should I say? If I hadn't been saved, wouldn't you be collecting my corpse by the time you recall?" "There won't be any collecting of corpses. If you die, I will die immediately. We are connected in life," Cass said without thinking. Liz gritted her teeth and flew up to punch Cass in the chest, causing him to cough repeatedly. He was still wounded. Cass coughed for a while before asking as though he had thought of something, "By the way, where's the Alpha University student we saved?" Liz, who had an arrogant expression, suddenly became embarrassed. About that. What's wrong? Is she still alive?" Liz immediately nodded, but she still looked embarrassed. "She's still alive, but what is it?" Cass asked suspiciously. "Wasn't I worried that she wouldn't let go of her thoughts and cause the teleportation to fail when I used fairy fog? Therefore, I let her sleep first." Cass nodded. This was something she often did before he got used to the teleportation of fairy fog. And for some reason, she doesn't seem to be waking up now. The girl lay on a simple wooden bed, her forehead covered in sweat. Her expression kept twisting and changing as if she was deep in a nightmare. Cass tried tugging at her arm, but the other party didn't react at all. He turned to look at Liz, who was flying in midair. "It's not usually like this," Liz said innocently. With that said, she made a tossing motion, and a handful of dust that shone with a golden luster landed on the girl's face. Instantly, the tense muscles on the girl's face relaxed a little, and her eyelids began to tremble slightly as if she was about to wake up. However, this situation lasted less than 10 seconds. As the dust gradually dissipated, she returned to her previous state. Generally speaking, she should be awake by now. Liz looked at Cass with an expression that said, "This definitely isn't my problem." She wore this expression every time she caused trouble. Cass sighed and said, "Why don't you try to wake her up using tougher means? She looks like she's just having a nightmare." Before Liz could answer, a familiar voice came from outside the door. "It's useless. Her soul is in the nightmare swamp now. That's the moon realm of the Lord of Nightmare. Ordinary methods can't wake her up." Cass turned his head and saw Nazemar standing at the door. She had changed into her previous outfit. She had an exquisite repeating crossbow on her back and a silver rapier at her waist. "You said you would come to me soon. It's so soon?" Cass asked curiously when he saw her. "I just received new information that the Duke is about to take action, so I came to look for you." As Nazemar spoke, she walked to the bed and placed her hand on the girl's forehead. After a while, she said, "A fairy's dream dust will change the effects of the dream according to the user's emotions." The fairy from before had too much going through her emotionally when she fell asleep, causing her to fall into a nightmare. Cass nodded and said, "I know that. I've experienced it a few times before. It wasn't easy. Hey, but it's not to the point of not waking up, right?" Cass ignored Liz's protest and asked, "Generally speaking, that's the case, but in the tunnel earlier, you happened to encounter the spawn of the Lord of Nightmare. It connected this child's nightmare to the nightmare swamp through its authority." As Nazemar spoke, she took out a letter and quill from her bag and sat at the side to write something. "Who's the Lord of Nightmare?" Cass asked. "One of the Void Sovereigns in charge of nightmares, illusions, and fog, which can turn the normal into abnormalities. The Nightmare Swamp is her domain, and it's connected to every mortal's nightmare. The lunar monster that almost killed you previously is a spawn called the Fog Nightmare under her command. They can revive inanimate humanoid objects through possession," Nazemar answered as she wrote. Her words reminded Cass of the puncture wound in his abdomen and the skeletons he couldn't kill. "Is the Lord of Nightmare the Void Sovereign Duke Simon wants to summon to the world?" Cass frowned and asked. "Not necessarily, but it's indeed one of the possible options." The ancient Blackwater Kingdom had a long history of believing in the three Moon Realm goddesses, and the Lord of Nightmare was one of them. As Nazemar spoke, she stopped writing and placed the letter into the envelope. Then, she got up and took a candle from the candlestick beside him. She dripped wax and sealed the envelope before saying to Cass, let's go. There's not much time left. Cass pointed at the girl lying on the bed and asked, then what about her? If her soul is still trapped in the moon realm as you said, we can't just leave her here, right? Nizemar waved the envelope in her hand. We don't have to worry about her. Send this letter to her father. Someone will naturally deal with all of this soon. Cass asked in confusion. Why? Who is she? Nizemar said as she walked. Her name is Liliana von Bergman. You should understand when you hear this last name, right? It should have been almost 20 minutes. Vincent's adjutant waited at the entrance of the Silver Stream mine in boredom. The pile of miner corpses had already been dragged away by the bramble guards. He believed that his contract partner could definitely make good use of the corpses. With this in mind, he couldn't help but smile in delight. This way, after completing the second contract, the gift from the moon realm would rise another level. He could even attempt to touch the realm he originally had no hope of reaching in his life. Now, studying moon realm magic was basically an open secret in the Rose Palace's Mage Hall. Only a few pedantic people still guarded the ancient astral laws. Most of these incompetent people who were afraid of change ended up being gradually pushed out of the center of power. Of course, a very small number of people who planned on exposing this to the church suddenly disappeared without a word. No one could betray the whispering Empress. However, he couldn't figure out why Vincent, who should be more against the astral laws than anyone else, was unwilling to join them. It was said that the Duke had prepared the most compatible contract for Vincent back then. As long as he signed it, he could step into the realm that had left him out for 15 years. Could anyone really resist this temptation? But that's good too, the adjutant thought. Before coming here to suppress the riots, the Duke had specially instructed him to strictly enforce the Black Thorn regulations. Anyone who might leak information about the Moon Realm had to be silenced. Most importantly, the Duke even told him meaningfully at the end that if his old friend Vincent became senile, he had to give the order on his behalf. Would the Sage of Scorching Scars become senile? The adjutant naturally understood what the Duke meant. Giving him the actual command of the mission to suppress the Silver Stream mine was also him taking a position. Although Vincent was still undoubtedly the number one person below legendary, with the arrival of the New Age, it was high time the powerhouses of the Old Age retired. Especially those from the Old Age who weren't willing to embrace the future powerhouses. Under the protection of the three goddesses, even Divine Realm level magic chanters would probably appear in the future Blackwater Kingdom. Therefore, the Duke must not be disappointed by the suppression mission. Just as he was thinking about the beautiful future, heavy footsteps gradually became clear from the darkness. He shuddered and looked over. Vincent von Bergman walked out of the pitch-black mine with a tired expression. He immediately smiled and went forward. Lord Vincent, how's the situation below the mine? Where's that heretical mage? He got away, Vincent replied without any emotion in his tone. The expression on the adjutant's face froze. He got away. Yes, the other parties' attainments in lightning spells are very high. I couldn't stop him from opening the teleportation door and leaving. But how could you let him run? The adjutant couldn't hold back his emotions and blurted out a few words. Then, he immediately realized what he had said. He lowered his head and lowered his voice to make it sound as humble as possible. What I mean is that since the other party is a heretical mage, it's impossible for him to be stronger than you, right? Vincent shook his head, but he didn't answer his question. Instead, he said to the bramble guards behind him, go down and tidy up the venue below. This altar can't be used anymore. Everything has to be destroyed. Seeing the black-armored guards accept the orders and walk into the mine in unison, Vincent turned to look at his adjutant and said, return to the Rose Palace with me first. I have something to tell Simon. The adjutant gritted his teeth and said, Lord Vincent, with all due respect, I'm afraid that the Duke will be very unhappy for you to let the heretical mage escape at this critical juncture of the Duke's plan. Can you track the teleportation coordinates of that heretical mage? I can go with you to capture him. Vincent subconsciously smiled bitterly when he heard that. You, me, and the remaining battle mages can't do anything to that person. More importantly, compared to what he's going to do next, the destruction of the altar in this mine isn't a big deal. The adjutant looked at the Peak Master magic chanter in front of him in disbelief. Who is that heretical mage?